Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 28th of September 2024. We're going to start with a fairly disturbing article coming out from El País, the Spanish newspaper. This is according to Nexta. Volodymyr Zelensky prepares for negotiations. After almost 3 years of full-scale war, Ukraine is exhausted, both on the front line and in the energy sector, says the publication. At the same time, its Western partners are increasingly promoting the idea of peace talks with Russia, in which Ukraine could be forced to make painful concessions. And I think this is probably somewhat accurate, as in we are seeing, for example, and we'll talk about this at length later, we have Donald Trump really urging, wanting to see there be negotiations, wants there to be an end to the war, and others, no doubt, similarly giving some pressure to Zelensky. Obviously, places like Hungary and Slovakia are going to be going down that Russian appeasement route. But there will be increasing pressure the longer this war goes on, and the more that allies have to help Ukraine financially, militarily. There will be increasing pressure on Zelensky and Ukraine to bring this conflict to an end. But of course, Ukraine, and this is my position, need to have some success on the battlefield, which will be expedited by support from the West. As long as it's decent support in enough quantities and with enough capabilities, Ukraine can force themselves into a much better position on the battlefield that puts them at a much better position on the negotiating table. And that's what needs to happen first. And so it depends what the political will is of these people initially. Like, had Biden's administration been even stronger, you could argue that Ukraine would be in a much better position now to negotiate, but they aren't, because there's been this kind of drip feed approach. It's been like brilliant in terms of like the support has been fairly widespread and the rhetoric's been there. And there has been an awful lot of equipment that's found its way to Ukraine that, had it not happened, Ukraine would be absolutely done for. So the West has done this much, but they really needed to have done this much. But some people in the West wanted help to have been this much. And that's where I think sort of Trump and Slovakia and Hungary are. You know, this is what we've done. This is what they wanted us to have done, because they wanted to just Ukraine to have capitulated to Russia, to appease Russia. And this is where people like me want the help to have been, right? So while I'm criticizing the Biden administration, that is way better than that, which is what I think the alternative would have been. But I think we are entering this stage where, you know, Zelensky has provided a victory plan. He understands that we may be moving into a different phase of the war now, where negotiations are on the horizon. But that horizon is actually a little closer than it was before. And now this is about, you know, moving into the end game. You know, in a game of chess, it's like you've lost both your rooks. You've got a knight. You've got a bishop. You've got your queen left. But you're moving into the stage where, most of my pawns are gone. We're moving into the stage where I need to be checking the opposition. That's where we're at. So again, next here, talking about this situation with Balázs Orbán, no relation to Viktor Orbán, but is one of his aides. This is incredibly controversial, to the point where people had said this should cause Hungary to be kicked out of NATO. So there is potentially some large fallout to this. This is what his advisor, Viktor Orbán's advisor, said. We wouldn't do what Zelensky did 2.5 years ago because it's irresponsible. He said Ukraine should have abandoned the resistance in 2022 to reduce the number of casualties. Quote, he entered a defensive war with his country, and we see how many people died and how much territory was lost. Basically, he's saying that Hungary would have surrendered to Russia had Russia invaded Hungary. And this is causing a lot of people to go, whoa, hang on. Julia Davis says it's not a mistake. Trump and Orbán obviously believe everyone should surrender to Ukraine. So, Politico Europe Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said his top aide made a mistake when he signalled during an interview that Hungary would have lain down to the Russian army if it had been in Ukraine's position. So Orban has then come out and sort of slapped down the aide who said Hungary would surrender to Ukraine, to Russia, but saying, very kind of half-hearted. Here it says Viktor Orban's top aide issued a half-hearted apology on Friday after his controversial comments on Ukraine were called out by Hungarian Prime Minister. Balázs Orbán, the Prime Minister's political director, no relation, said he hadn't intended to cause any misunderstanding when he signalled during an interview that Hungary would have lain down to the Russian army if it had been in Ukraine's position. It was a mistake on my part, and if I offended anyone, I apologise. He wrote in a Facebook post just hours after Viktor Orban also described his top aide's comment as a mistake. Balázs Orbán's claimed earlier it was a lesson learned from Hungary's own unsuccessful battle against the Russians in 1956. The remarks quickly mushroomed into a scandal with opposition politicians calling for the aide to resign. But while he gently chided the key advisor, Viktor Orban said that the words were largely misinterpreted. Quote, "We have to keep a clear head, so when we talk about such sensitive issues, we have to be very precise and have no doubt about our own position," Viktor Orban said during an interview on Hungarian state radio Friday morning. "Now, my political director has phrased his words in a confusing way, which is a mistake in this context because our community is rooted in the 1956 revolution. It grew out of it," so on and so forth. But yeah, this is a pretty revealing, I think, statement from a key Hungarian here that suggests that basically Hungary is just a lapdog to Russia. Okay, Prune60 here says, "What hurts my head is how there are still people trying to say that the Russian economy is doing great." The reason why people are saying the Russian economy is doing great is because essentially they want it to do great. They want people who aren't overtly pro-Russian but exist in this Russian-influenced ecosystem, whether it be Charlie Kirk in the US or, I don't know, Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever it is. Some, often Americans, maybe people on the far left in Germany, on the far right in Germany, on the far right in France, etc., who aren't Russian, but they say, Ukraine have no future in this war. They can't win this war. Have you seen the size of the Russian economy? Look at its GDP. Its GDP is growing faster than anyone else in Europe. Yeah, because they're producing more. And what they're producing? Tanks. Okay, their GDP's gone up is because they're whacking all their money into their defense industry. But that is not a good sign of a healthy economy. And so Prune60 here says, "I can't believe that there are still people advocating for, Russian victory on the basis of their amazing economy." Of course, she says, "Of course, there's a good chance they're being paid to say that." And this is in answer to themselves, announcing that the key rate of the Russian bank, or the Bank of Russia, may exceed the maximum level for the new era of 20%. So interest rates might break the 20% threshold, believes the first deputy chairman of the VTB board, Dmitry Pionov. So this is, he said, "I personally agree that we will test a maximum of 20% and break through it in order to curb our inflation. And this, in essence, opens up a huge variety of key dynamics curves for 2025. Goodness me. So above 20% interest rates is incredible. And it means that there is a huge issue with inflation, and that is going to be largely driven by wage increases due to needing to attract people to the armed forces, so paying them crazy money to just join up, and therefore creating also the amount of people that have died and been injured and who have fled Russia means that there's a huge labour shortage. And because there's a labour shortage in any domain, employers are going to have to be offering high wages in order to compete with each other to just get people into work. There is a labour shortage, as potentially millions of people have disappeared from the labour market. Everyone's fighting for those people, and you get supply and demand, meaning that low supply, high demand, high prices, high wages. So this is causing inflation, which then needs to be controlled by interest rates, because there's very few things actually a government can do to control inflation, despite it being a political football. Say in the United States, it it can be quite a difficult thing to control. India won't buy from sanctioned Russia from their Arctic LNG-2 project, according to Reuters. India will not purchase liquefied natural gas from Russia's Arctic LNG-2 project, which has been sanctioned by Western countries, Indian Oil Secretary Pankaj Jain said. Now, this again leads into the woes of Russia and the Russian economy. They make most of their money from hydrocarbons, and sanctioning the hydrocarbon industry is one way of and having an effect on Chinese and Indian purchasing will have a huge effect on the Russian ability to make money and to be able to fund the war in Ukraine. This is huge. Now, we're going to talk briefly about the UN and about how Russia can be kicked out of the UN. VLP I spoke with Talaria on my video, live discussion kicking Russia out of the UN Security Council. So yes, Russia can be kicked out of the UN, kicked out because they're in it, but they shouldn't actually be in it. Easily, within a week, no veto, no UN reform. We've been lied to for 33 years. Here's how. And the video and documents on her Substack do describe all of this, but let's just quickly run through it. The truth about Russian terrorist state and the United Nations, how the Russian Federation got into the UN. It didn't. It's not really in it. Video confession by the perpetrator hidden on the UN site. Click this link to watch a video and read the transcript so you can go and find all the supporting evidence of this. But confirmation from UN records, no record that members were advised, let alone consulted, let alone agreed to Russia being in the UN. It appears that UN representatives were lied to, as Vorontsov said. In the real world, that is fraud. So you can go and check the details of that. We're just quickly running over the main skeleton here. The cover-up, the disinformation campaign from within the UN. Click here to see the lies analysed and refuted. There you have a kind of cover-up of how they got into the UN. And here we are, the UN sponsoring a protection racket and the spreading of corruption, misery and terror throughout the world. This needs to stop. Again, go and check out the links. And I'll try and put a link to this thread in the description to the video. What I don't understand is why are Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the President repeating Russian disinformation? How could they not remember? Why was my email to them forwarded to the Ukrainian MFA in Australia instead of to them? What the F is going on? So she's obviously tried to get answers for this. People don't seem to be talking about how Russia adopted this seat in the UN and the UN Security Council on by point of fact that they just stole the USSR seat effectively, and yet the USSR was made up of all these different components, including Ukraine. And why is it Ukraine doesn't? They didn't follow any protocol. Just Russia kind of just went, right, we're having this seat, thank you very much. And they're not really legitimately in the UN in the same way that you would adopt any new nation into the UN in, using particular processes. Russia just assumed it. Why does no one know of all this? 33 years of Kremlin rewriting history, perhaps? So the Kremlin has done a good job to kind of muddy the waters here and throw people off with disinformation and misdirection. The shields and useful idiots and influencers in academia, administrations and think tanks, trolls poisoning social media, where she analyses a slew of those. They don't go there, fearmongers, even well-intentioned ones. In this case, taking a pop shot at Vlad Vexler. And the blamers and whatabouts. One example, NATO expansion, anyone? And then there's so much to this. And the coup de grace, the fake dead end festooned with apparent elites, the trap to divert the skeptics who persisted through the other trolls, shills and disinformation. Here's the only thing you can do. Sign a petition to do nothing. So it's like, this is what we can do. And actually, that's misdirecting you away from the things that should be being done. All that's needed is more votes for than against. You just need a vote. Abstentions are not counted. 11 for, 10 against passes. and there's rules of procedure for the General Assembly. So the question is, how do you bring this to the General Assembly to vote on? Who has the guts to do it? Will China or the US veto expulsion of the invasion by force and a buffer zone in Russia? I don't think so, risking a potential mass boycott. Will Putin survive politically after losing the veto? Will Putin withdraw in the face of the UN forces? I think so. Let's have that vote that the UN was duped out of in 1991. So it never got the vote for Russia going in. So she's saying, look, there needs to be a vote to just a general vote, a majority vote. Better late than never, like China in 1971 after 20 years. Russian fraud renders any claim of consent invalid. Let Putin apply to the ICJ if he seriously believes Russia is a member. Oh, he can't. So there you go. Well worth going and checking over. There's more to add here, but go and check VLP's or Talaria's Substack and thread here, and you can get for each of these claims there is a link to click on to give you substantiation of those claims. Without removal of Russia, Gutierrez's United Nations reforms can be vetoed by Russia. He has thereby made reform impossible and placed the UN itself at risk of abolition by fueling criticism with no means to remedy. So in other words, you can't even reform the UN to try and do something about Russia because Russia just get to veto it, so on and so forth. So the only way to get to a UN that is fit for purpose and that isn't being upset, really isn't being compromised by Russia, is to get Russia out of the UN. And you can then apply to come back in, and you can apply to be on the UN Security. It's a Security Council that is a real issue there, where they get this permanent seat on the Security Council, which is invalid. They are not entitled to that position. Anyway, China's newest nuclear-powered attack submarine sank in spring, a major setback for one of the country's priority weapons programs, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, I reported on this, but I don't think it was this one. So there was a rumor that a Chinese submarine sank, but it sank out somewhere else. And that was all kind of like, oh, did it, didn't it? And there are certain OSINT sources that are like, yeah, we lost contact with this submarine, or it seems to have disappeared. And actually, using this bit of evidence, that bit of evidence, there seems to have been a sinking of a submarine. This one, I think, is different to that, which is that it sank in a port, I think, and it's a newest nuclear powered submarine. And this was highly controversial, so watch out for that. It is in the news. Go and check it out. There is lots of talk about this, and it happened apparently in spring, and it's only just, the cat has only just gone out of the bag. US does not currently know whether the submarine was carrying nuclear fuel when it sank. Okay, now moving on to the US, and there's lots going on in the US, as we know. So I'm going to just talk you through what's happened over the last, I guess, week, 3 or 4 or 5 days. It started off with Trump saying, actually it didn't start off. It started off with the Pennsylvania visit of Zelensky to the Scranton Army ammunition plant and meeting people there. And then you had Trump coming out and doing some rallies and talks and whatnot, pressers, where he said things like Ukraine is gone. And he was like, these cities are gone. They can never be rebuilt again. By the way, have you seen Nagasaki these days? But anyway, was really saying, as Kiev Post here says, Ukraine is gone. Before again calling for Ukraine to appease Putin, Trump runs through a series of verbatim Kremlin talking points, initially disparaging President Zelensky before moving on to the crown jewel of Russian disinformation narratives, namely that Ukraine doesn't exist. At this point, shouldn't Americans be asking who Trump actually works for? So that's how the Ukrainians were interpreting this in their own media, right? I'm just reporting this here. Trump's then you got Michael McFaul, who was the ambassador to Russia in 2012 to 2014. He said Trump's attacks on Zelensky are shocking. Trump's praise of Putin is shocking. No presidential candidate in 100 years has talked this way about Democrats and dictators. I hope it's all campaign rhetoric. I fear it's not. So this was really serious. And then you got Charlie Kirk, who's involved in Turning Point USA. Is a real He's a real piece of work, Charlie Kirk. Not a fan of him. Pekka Kaliniemi says of him, Charlie here being dishonest as usual. The elections in Ukraine were cancelled and had nothing to do with Zelensky. In Article 19 of Ukraine's martial law legislation specifically forbids conducting national elections. Also, Article 83 of the Ukrainian constitution states that, quote, if the term of the Verkhovna Rada expires under martial law, it shall automatically be extended until a new Rada is seated following the end of martial law. I've done a whole video on this, but Charlie Kirk, using Russian basically talking point, says, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky disrespects American voters by campaigning for Kamala in Pennsylvania, remember that Zelensky cancelled his own country's elections and his term expired 6 months ago. So that is Russian disinformation, and he is feeding that to his American audience, which then gives them a sense of resentment that why are the US supporting a non-democratic nation, etc., etc. It plays into the Russian narrative. Now, Charlie Kirk is one of many people who is going to be turning up at one of these two events. You've got Rage Against the War Machine again. They had one of these before. And you've got another one. So Pekka Kaliniemi says, in today's Vatnik Soup, I will discuss two events, Rescue the Republic and Rage Against the War Machine. These are being held during the last weekend of September in 2024 in Washington, D.C. Both of these events promote pro-Kremlin viewpoints and platform many prominent Vatniks. Rage Against the War Machine is being organised for the third time, although the second instalment, Defeat the Deep State, was cancelled, probably due to low interest. The event was organised by the Libertarian Party, a US political party that has recently been hijacked by Vatniks. There's been a lot of people quite angry about the Libertarian Party seeming to be becoming quite essentially an arm of the Republican Party and having very many problematic viewpoints expressed within the Libertarian Party that aren't truly that libertarian or aligned with how they normally would have been. So both events are co-organised by craniosacral therapist or chair of the Libertarian National Committee, Angela McArdle, who was leading the Libertarian Party takeover in 2022 and turning it into an extension of Trump's MAGA Republicans. That's exactly what I was saying. And he's done a Vatnik Soup on her previously. Out of the two, Rescue the Republic has a much higher profile speakers, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., Russell Brand, Jordan Peterson, Tulsi Gabbard. Incidentally, each of those have their own entries on Vatnik Soup. This is a list of people I'm no fan of, right? But this is like intellectual dark web. I don't know if you know terms like this, but IDW, intellectual dark web, is very much Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, people who are, I've often said before, gateways to the alt-right, gateway drugs to the alt-right. So Jordan Peterson can say some good things in some contexts. Actually, his claims on Marxism, he doesn't know Marxism, though he claims to know a lot about Marxism, but you want to see him get picked apart by Slovakian philosopher, what's his name, Zizek. But anyway, his claims on Marxism are very poor, but he sells people who don't know much about Marxism themselves, and etc., etc. So anyway, Jordan Peterson, problematic in my books. Russell Brand's gone completely nuts recently. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is like a shill for Trump, a shill for Putin. Brett Weinstein, you've got Tulsi Gabbard, Charlie Kirk, who I don't know, Eric Bolling there, so on and so forth. So some of these people that are just, really problematic. You've also got people like Rod Schneider. And in addition, there are some B-listed Trump operatives like the failed actor Rob Schneider, urine inspector, Pizzagate promoter Jack Posobiec, and comedian or joke Jimmy Dore. So some from the left, some from the right, coming together to shill for Putin. The event seems to be protesting against some sort of industrial complex, and it brings together Kremlin appeasers, COVID-19 vaccine mandate opponents, free speech advocates, and of course conspiracy theorists. And you can look at their 8 pillars there. Just is deeply problematic, I would say. It's easy to predict the contents of the rally. Many will advocate for Trump and blame the Democrats and NATO for warmongering. Some will mention the culture wars. They'll also call for ending the war in Ukraine, which basically means stopping US aid to Ukraine. Rage Against the War Machine has much more pathetic lineup, and it seems that McArdle is scraping the bottom of the Vatnik barrel. There's 0 household names, and out of this sad bunch, Douglas McGregor is probably the best known. And of course, Colonel McGregor, scare quotes, Colonel Douglas McGregor is, disband NATO, stop the war inflation, negotiate peace, pardon Julian Assange. abolish war and empire, restore civil liberties, abolish the CIA and military industrial deep state, slash the Pentagon budget, so on and so forth. You got Colonel Douglas McGregor there. I don't know any of those others, to be honest, but there you go. Out of the others, Daniel McAdams is a fervent supporter of both Putin and al-Assad. Garland Nixon is a former Sputnik journalist. That's a Russian propaganda news media source. Josie Grabach as Tim Pool's co-host and strong supporter of Russian imperialism. Oh my goodness. So essentially, this is terrible that this is a conduit for Russian disinformation. At a rally, at 2 rallies, Rescue the Republic has a high chance of being a successful event as it brings together MAGA Republicans, anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists and Christian nationalists. I'm sure both events will feature some Russian flags and members of the Code Pink propaganda group. Ultimately, both events will try to bolster Trump's presidential campaign by supporting his policies and empty promises and defaming and blaming the Democrats, Biden and Harris for everything negative going on in the United States. So this is a real worry. So anyway, that's just a sidebar on Charlie Kirk. Now, talking about Charlie Kirk's accusations concerning Zelensky's visit to Pennsylvania and Scranton Army Ammunition Plant, Karine Jean-Pierre, the spokesperson for the White House, said there is nothing unusual about Zelensky's visit to the plant in Pennsylvania. Quote, just 2 months ago, President Zelensky visited Utah and held a very similar event with the Republican governor, and there was no demand for an investigation. So there are some double standards going on here for people who are accusing Zelensky of doing a solid for the Democrats and for the campaign there, considering he's done the same thing but for Republicans previously. Gary Kasparov says war is more serious than politics. Zelensky is trying to save the lives of his people and a factory is helping. His country is dying and Trump and his acolytes are demanding Ukraine surrender to sacrifice their blood and territory for a genocidal invader. He says that in response to Speaker Mike Johnson calling on Ukrainian president to fire Ukraine's ambassador to the US for this kind of stuff. This is life and death for Ukraine, continues Kasparov. Accusing Zelensky of partisan interference is ironic. You know who has picked a side in American politics? Vladimir Putin. Russia, an enemy of the US, by the way, has invested billions in supporting MAGA going back to Trump's first campaign. And this is true. This is like empirically validated. Trump attacks Zelensky at his rallies. Vance regurgitates Kremlin talking points, yet Zelensky would likely be happy to visit an arms factory in, say, Geopol, Ohio, where they are producing vital weapons, dollars and jobs, but no invite because Trump. So it's really good points there. Now, if Zelensky visiting one of the main factories providing his nation with munitions for their existential war is apparently unacceptable foreign meddling, then what does it mean for Viktor Orban to visit Donald Trump at a campaign event? So there's silence. There's talk about Zelensky going to a military factory in Pennsylvania, but strange silence about Viktor Orban at an actual campaign event for Donald Trump. So it's fine that the Hungarian pro-Putin dictator wannabe can visit Trump at a campaign event, but Zelensky can't visit a factory that's helping his country existentially survive. What is going on here? If you are one of the people who has been criticising Zelensky for this, have a look at your own double standards. As Karim Rifai here says, Zelensky has zero obligation to entertain proposals that would mean the destruction of his country. US support for Ukraine isn't a one-way street. This is so important. Ukrainian soldiers are fighting against one of our most threatening geopolitical foes. Enough of this hysteria. Enough. And this is in response to a sort of headline that says, Zelensky stumbles into partisan battle with Vance remarks, Pennsylvania trip. Rifai continues, Zelensky isn't here to seek charity, right? Yes, he wants stuff from the US, but it's not charity. It's in the US's strategic interest to do that. So this is a defense partnership critical to Washington, not just Kyiv, says Rifai. And that's absolutely right. I've said for forever and a day that anybody's support of Ukraine is morality after national interests. There is no such thing as a free lunch. We aren't giving aid to Ukraine because it's charitably nice to do so. Oh, you poor country. oh, let's give you loads of tanks and weapons. I'll really feel sorry for you, so let's give you all this. We don't go around the world doing that whenever nations get into particular scuffles around the world, right? When we do it, it's precisely because it's in our strategic interest to do so. Why did we get involved in Iraq and not in Zimbabwe? Because Zimbabwe doesn't have oil. Why did we get involved in Libya? And not Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe doesn't have oil. Why do we get involved in Ukraine? Yes, because actually it does align morally as well, in a way that some of these other ones didn't. Ukraine has a very strong moral component, and that's why I'm interested in it as a single human being, not as a nation state. But as a nation state, we are very interested in supporting Ukraine because it's absolutely vital we do so for our own strategic interests in terms of trade, hegemony, hydrocarbons, food, national security, cyber warfare, cyber security, information security. All of these things are why we are supporting Ukraine. So when Zelensky goes to the US, it's to say, just to remind you on all the reasons that you need to support us and why you need to give us more. Because at the moment, you're not giving us enough, so that those objectives that you have in mind will not be reached. They will not be realized because you haven't quite done enough yet. So that's what Zelensky is doing. Now, there's been this huge difference in rhetoric between, say, Biden and Harris and Trump over Ukraine. And this needs to be understood. This can't be overemphasized. Here, we've got Biden at a meeting with Zelensky saying Russia will not win this war, Ukraine will win. So very clear. It's not like, let's do a fair deal. Let's make sure that this is a fair transaction, where fair is equally applied to Putin as it is to Zelensky. As if, and this is what Trump has been saying, there needs to be a fair deal, as if Putin needs some kind of fair outcome here. Whereas Biden very clearly saying Russia won't win this war, Ukraine will win. And we haven't heard that at all from Trump. We have not heard Trump talk about who will prevail, only that there will be peace and a negotiated settlement that will be, scare quotes, fair. So I honestly understand that there's a gulf that exists between these two parties and where they see this war going and who they side with. And I say parties, but really I mean the Trumpian iteration of the GOP, because there are many in the GOP that don't agree to this. But unfortunately, the people at the top of the ticket do. Vance and Trump are very much not in support of Ukraine prevailing. They have never said that they want Ukraine to win, that they want Ukraine to prevail in this war. They've shied away from, and that should tell you all you need to know. And then we had
President Zelensky.
We had Harris meeting with Zelensky, and her rhetoric was absolutely on point. The difference between the two is huge. Harris points out there are some in my country. Well, just listen to this. This is what you need to hear.
In Switzerland in June, along with 90 other nations at the Ukraine Peace Conference, I told you that the United States shares your vision for the end of this war, an end based on the will of the people of Ukraine.
Okay, so this is freaking important, right? She sets out the foundation of a negotiated peace, being that we, in her words,
I told you that the United States shares your vision.
The foundation of sharing your vision. We are not dictating to you how peace should be, right? We are sharing your vision. This is what you have agency in this. And the reason I'm saying this, I'm getting a little bit heated, that someone on my thread yesterday who claims he's not a troll, even though I said troll be troll, and he said, troll, seriously, are you 5 years old? Instead explain how a victory plan is possible when you have lost, right? So we've got Lars Eriksson saying, you don't know what you're talking about. Zelensky is not in possession to have any demands. This will be solved between Trump and Putin and no one else. And I said, well, this is really awkward. So if you're not a troll, then you are morally and politically very naive. So the future of Ukraine and the sovereignty of Ukrainian people is a deal to be made between Trump and Putin without the sovereignty of Ukraine, without Ukraine being involved in their own future. Right, gotcha. You are a freaking troll. And if you're not a troll, you're just morally compromised. So to go back here, this is so important. You've got to understand the difference here between Harris and Trump. They are so freaking significant. She is saying the foundation to negotiations is that you have sovereignty and this is your negotiation and we share your values. We as the US, if we're involved in a negotiated settlement to you, it is not Trump dictating to you what should happen. It's us understanding that we share your values and what your desires are for the outcome of this conflict are our desires too.
I told you that the United States shares your vision for the end of this war. An end based on the will of the people of Ukraine.
Based on Ukrainian people's wills.
The UN Charter. And that we must work with the international community to secure a just and lasting peace.
A just and lasting peace. So a peace that not only just goes on for a year and then Russia attack again, so it needs to last, and it also needs to be just. Justice needs to prevail, which isn't just fair to Putin and you. There's justice, which means that if Putin and Russia have invaded you, they need to be held accountable and pay reparations and blah, blah, blah. So a peace needs to entail justice. That is really different rhetoric to what Trump is saying.
And I told world leaders there, nothing about the end of this war can be decided without Ukraine.
Bosh.
However, in Canada,
nothing can be decided without Ukraine. And here we have, this is between Trump and Putin and no one else. So this person, Lars Eriksson, you can sod off, mate. I had no time for you because you are someone that thinks the future of an entire sovereign nation should not be decided by that entire population of that nation. I have no time for you. You're a human being I don't want to interact with particularly.
I share with you, Mr. President, there are some in my country who would instead force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereign territory, who would demand that Ukraine accept neutrality and would require Ukraine to forego security relationships with other nations. These proposals are the same of those of Putin. And let us be clear.
Drop the mic.
They are not proposals for peace. Instead, they are proposals for surrender.
Yes.
Which is dangerous and unacceptable.
Yes.
So, President Zelensky, I look forward to our discussion today, and I will continue to work with you to ensure Ukraine prevails in this conflict and remains a free, democratic, and independent nation.
Right. Honestly, right, if you're someone that is still supporting Trump in this, that still somehow, because you love Trump so much, you think that he will be better somehow for Ukraine. Have you ever heard him say anything, one, as coherent as that, and two, as morally correct as that? No, you haven't. No, you haven't. Do you know why? Because he hasn't remotely said anything like that. Not even close, right? Not even close.
And today, and I will continue to work with you to ensure Ukraine prevails.
I'm working with you to ensure that Ukraine prevails. He can't even say that and hasn't even said that. And JD Vance hasn't said that. There is utter clarity on this issue as to who you should vote for if Ukraine is your one and only thing that is of your concern. Like, for me, at the moment, it is overwhelmingly my area of concern for US politics. I'm not a US citizen, so I can't vote, obviously. But if Ukraine was as important to me as a British citizen, to me as a US citizen, then there's only one party to vote for. There's only one ticket to vote for by an absolute country mile. And she says it as clearly in that 1 minute 34 seconds as you'll ever hear. There is no doubt about that. Putin started this war, she said, and he can end it tomorrow if he simply withdraws his troops from the sovereign territory of Ukraine. Not just from Ukraine, from the sovereign territory of Ukraine. He has demonstrated he has no intention of doing so. He continues to hit civilian objects, terrorizing Ukrainians. Absolutely. Gary Kasparov said, Biden and Harris have become more hawkish for Ukraine in the past few weeks, probably because Trump and Vance have renewed their pro-Kremlin attacks, and most Americans support Ukraine. Regardless of motivations, it's the right thing, and Harris committing like this now matters. Absolutely, 100%. And you've got, you've got your man saying that, and that just does my nut in. Right, here we have Kiev Independent says, Harris said that she had told world leaders at the UN nothing about the end of this war can be decided without Ukraine. Nothing can be decided without Ukraine. Ukraine is at the center of any kind of negotiations that happen. And they need to prevail in those negotiations, in the war and in the negotiations. That's the US position. That should be the US position, but it's not Trump's position. Trump's position is, and you can hear that by this. So listen how Trump answers. Do you think Ukraine should turn over its own land to Russia? So if I was Harris, like Harris would answer that no. Like we've heard what she said about giving up territory for peace. This is what Trump says. His answer, in case you didn't hear that, is we'll see what happens. Do you think Ukraine should hand it over? So it's a should. So this is a moral question. This is a normative moral question, which means that I'm asking you a hypothetical. Should they do this in order to get peace or whatever? It's not like, are they going to do this? But he answers that, we'll see what happens. He can't even answer, no, they shouldn't. We'll see what happens. And then here,
I disagree, but I will say this. I believe I will be able to make a deal between President Putin and President Zelensky quite quickly.
What does that look like?
What does it look like?
What is that?
I don't want to tell you what that looks like.
How convenient. Oh, I got the cure for cancer. Can you tell us? Because if you told us now, that would save quite a lot of people's lives. Yeah, I don't want to tell you what the cure for cancer is yet. I'll tell you because I knew this. I've told you I knew this back then, about 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. But I didn't tell you because I'll tell you in maybe after November. After November, I'll tell you what the cure for cancer is. Yeah, but what about all these people that are dying in the meantime? Surely the best thing you can do is tell us now how you would do that. Or maybe go and negotiate that on behalf of Ukraine right now. If you can, all right, straight away, get a deal and peace. Yeah, I won't tell you. I'm not going to tell you. Okay, fair enough. Trump then had a meeting, so he wasn't going to meet with Zelensky. Then he did meet with Zelensky, and he came out, and actually it fell far short of. He said a few interesting things like, "I've learnt a lot," so I think he is broadly ignorant about geopolitics of Ukraine, the history of Ukraine. He didn't even know that Ukraine had oil recently when in that conversation. Was that from some time back? So he's from his own words, he's admitted ignorance of Ukraine, right? And here he was, just deeply problematic stuff.
I mean, right now I'm campaigning, so right now I don't have much to do with it other than we're doing very well in terms of the campaign, and I've been saying that I believe if I win, we're going to have a very fair and I think actually rather rapid deal. It should stop, and the president wants it to stop, and I'm sure President Putin wants it to stop.
No, he doesn't.
And that's a good combination. So we want to have a fair deal for everybody.
What do you envision as fair?
Well, it's too early to say that. I mean, I have my own ideas, and I'm sure the president definitely has his own ideas, but it has to be fair.
It has to be fair, a fair deal for everybody. I mean, so Tim Miller, who used to work in the Republican campaign, Republican campaigns, he's a former Republican, now at the Bulwark, says this.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Miller from the Bulwark. There was an absolutely disgusting display in Trump Tower just a little bit ago as Donald Trump held a press conference where he just shamed himself and the country in his comments, standing next to Volodymyr Zelensky, who has shown unbelievable courage in the face of a unrepentant attack from a hostile power in Russia. The press conference happened after I taped today's podcast, so I wanted to get back on with you and give you my initial reaction to it because it can't wait. I mean, what Donald Trump did today just boggles the mind. It is a display of somebody that is so megalomaniacal, who has no interest in freedom and free people, who only cares about himself, and the degree to which this was, I guess you couldn't call it traitorous because he wasn't being traitorous to America really, but certainly just a complete abandonment of any stalwart commitment to our allies and to the forces of freedom throughout the world from a Republican presidential nominee. It's just extremely disheartening. So I think
That's an incredibly condemnatory analysis that he gives there, like much stronger than I was. I was actually trying to say, oh, Trump's taken a better position than he had done. Like, this is a move in the right direction, but it falls way short. Tim Miller's like, no, it's despicable. It's disgusting. What he said was disgusting. Zelensky said, I had a meeting with a bipartisan delegation from the US House of Representatives, during which I presented the key points of the victory plan, which can strengthen us on the path to peace. We are at a critical juncture in the war. We really need strong pressure and strong positions for Ukraine. We also discussed the situation on the battlefield, the protection of our energy grid, and the preparation of our country for the winter ahead. Freedom relies on a bipartisan support and determination of the United States. I'm grateful for America's support for Ukraine, which saves lives of our people and helps defend our independence and freedom. So really appealing to both sides of the aisle there, and that's exactly what he needs to do. With there's congressional votes in the future, he needs support from both sides. And yeah.
Does that mean if we don't pay you?
So.
But one of the leaders stood up and said, so does that mean he wasn't paid? He owed us billions. Does that mean if we don't pay you, you're not going to defend us against Russia? I said, that's what it means. Are you saying you're delinquent? Well, I don't know about that word. That's a real estate word. Very simple word. It means you're not paid. You're saying you're delinquent. Yes, let's say we're delinquent. Will you defend us? I said, absolutely not. I took so much heat from the fake news media. Now, if I said, yes, I will defend you, they're not going to pay. What happened?
So here he's talking about, the statement here is, in a terrifying and un-American moment, Donald Trump continues to reiterate the position that he will not defend NATO allies should they be invaded by Russia. So he's going on about this again. But what I find interesting here is just, again, a complete misunderstanding of how NATO works.
But one of the leaders stood up and said, so does that mean he wasn't paid? He owed us billions.
He doesn't owe no one owes the US billions. He doesn't understand. He doesn't freaking understand how NATO works. You are not paying for a thing, and it's not like the US pays more, so they pay more for a thing. It's how much you spend on your own defense as a percentage of GDP. So if I only pay 1% on defense, 1% of my GDP on defense, like that difference between 1% and 2%, I don't owe the US. Like, I don't owe that to Donald Trump. And yet that's what he said. It blows my mind that he actually doesn't understand how the freaking funding of the UN work, or not the funding of the UN, how the criteria for membership of the UN works. He thinks it's like zero-sum game, and if you don't pay enough on your defense, you owe that money to us. Just incredible. Anyway, we've got General Ben Hodges waiting in.
Obviously, this is all very good news, and it will give Ukraine not only the physical capability.
That's the $8 billion announced
to defend their country against Russian invaders, but it also sends a signal to Ukrainians and to Russia that the United States is, in fact, going to continue to support Ukraine. So these are the positive things. The frustrating thing, though, is that these are the kind of decisions that should have been made 2 years ago.
Yep.
If the administration would make it very clear that we want Ukraine to actually win this war, because it's in our strategic interest. This is not charity.
Yes.
One of the things that
it's
we
not
know
charity.
that President Zelensky has been hoping for is a lifting of the restrictions on firing these long-range weapons that would go deep inside of Russian territory. Do you expect the administration will lift some of these restrictions?
Well, they certainly should, because that would enable Ukraine to strike places from which the attacks are originating that are killing innocent Ukrainian civilians every single day. So this is about helping Ukraine defend itself. The problem is the administration, I think, is excessively concerned, or has an excessive fear, that Russia might use a nuclear weapon in response. I think there is almost zero chance Russia uses a nuclear weapon, because there is no benefit for Russia to use a nuclear weapon. And the
Such an
administration
obvious point.
continues to hesitate, though, because of the Russian, the President Putin, for example, coming out saying he's changed the doctrine about nuclear weapons. That is only the continuation of Kremlin efforts to cause us to continue to hesitate. It's working. We should change the policy, allow Ukraine to defend themselves.
Zelensky has gotten himself into a bit of hot water with the Speaker of the House and former President Donald Trump over a recent visit to a Pennsylvania munitions factory, notably with Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro, Senator Bob Casey, also a Democrat, and others. I wanted to get your take on this because, listen, Zelensky is here specifically to advocate, as he has advocated on behalf of his own country, to get American help in this war. But what kind of challenges can American domestic politics pose to that effort?
Well, first of all, this is a gigantic non-story. It's a political effort by the Trump campaign and his supporters in the Congress to diminish the support for Ukraine. Never in my life did I imagine that the Republican Party would be using Kremlin talking points, talking about how Ukraine has already lost. Russia, after 10 and a half years, controls only about 18% of Ukraine, and they've lost over 500,000 soldiers. So the idea that
I think General Ben Hodges recently came out on a video and said, "Look, I was a Republican all my life." I think it might be January the 6th that sent him the other way, but he is not a fan of Trump at the moment.
Somehow Ukraine is losing, that is a total fairy tale. But also this visit to the ammunition plant in Scranton, Pennsylvania is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it reminds everybody that American factories and American workers are producing this ammunition. This is good for the United States. It also counters the statement by Senator Vance a few months ago that America doesn't have the industrial capacity to compete against Russia, which is absolute nonsense. And then finally, of course, President Zelensky was out in Utah a couple of months ago with a Republican governor. There were no calls for investigations after that. So I think this is already a nothing story, and we should focus on helping Ukraine defeat Russia because it's in our strategic interest.
And I think that just beautifully sums up everything I was saying earlier. So thank you, Ben Hodges. And what's interesting is you're starting to get memes like this, right? And I think that's quite effective, where you've got the image of Trump looking from right to left, and you've got the image of Putin looking from left to right, and those two faces, those two profiles go together to give the whole image of Trump. In other words, people are starting to overtly claim that Putin is inside Trump in some kind of way, that Putin is within the sphere of influence. Sorry, Trump is within the sphere of influence of Putin. So whether you believe this or not, and whether you're a Trump supporter going, no, a load of rubbish, blah, 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 this is what is starting to be understood. And that is deeply concerning from a political point of view, from a national security point of view for the United States. And on the other hand, you have Mitch McConnell. And this is the last thing I'll do is just play this. You've got Mitch McConnell, the original, the kind of OG Republican leader of the Senate Republicans, who is a long-term Republican linchpin that has basically driven Republican strategizing, well, really up until Trump came along, and then became a bit compromised. And after January the 6th was really critical of Trump, and then has been a little bit on the sidelines since then. But this is, wow, Mitch McConnell, in a matter of 30 seconds, managed to say that the demonization of Ukraine started with Tucker Carlson and that Donald Trump didn't want to do anything about the border.
Well, the answer, I think the demonization of Ukraine began by Tucker Carlson, who, in my opinion, ended up where he should have been all along, which is interviewing Vladimir Putin. And so he had an enormous audience, which convinced a lot of rank-and-file Republicans that maybe this was a mistake. I think the former president had sort of mixed views on it. We all felt that the border was a complete disaster, myself included. And Chad, you remember covering the phases we went through. First, there was an effort to make law, which requires you to deal with Democrats. And then a number of our members thought it wasn't good enough. And then our nominee for president didn't seem to want us to do anything at all. That took months to work our way through it. So,
And there he is saying, well, Trump scuppered the border deal, you know, and Trump's bit here and there over Ukraine, and rank and file Republicans are getting disinformed by Tucker Carlson. And the demonization of Ukraine started with Tucker Carlson. I mean, that's quite a 1 minute there of Mitch McConnell as a central figure in the Republican Party admitting that. Anyway, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching and listening. Really appreciate all of your support. And a special shout out today for Michael E. Winkler. Very generous support of the channel. So thank you to Michael for that. Super stuff. Anyway, really appreciate all of you. Have a good rest of the day, and I may or may not get back to you later. It is going to be a busy day from here on in.